have a bit of an obsession with eudaimonia. Not only is it in the title of the talk today, it's in the title of my PhD, if I do get around to finishing it, I suppose. And today I want to talk to you about eudaimonia and eudaimonia in the extractive industries. I'm going to cut to it. I'm going to use some images though to help me get started, because I could talk about the destructive impacts of mining for way more than 15 minutes, and then we'd just be finished and I wouldn't have got to eudaimonia. So I just want to use a few images here, and I'm going to cheat and use my cards. And I want you to think about, when you're looking at these photos, I just want you to think about what that might mean if you're looking. So picture yourself in a subsistence community. You're living along the Waitut River in the Morobe province of Papua New Guinea. And your national government and a pretty big transnational company wants to come and mine your lands. And they're in a hurry to do it, and they want to do it as quickly as possible and make as much money as possible. This image by Caleb Ham is trying to speak to us about alternate possibilities, alternate futures for what these people, what their future might look like. So rather than just thinking all about mining, just thinking about a range of things that they could be doing. A mixture of really old things, with the woman gardening with her billum, that's the bag on her back, to the young girl using a phone. There's no roads in this area, there's no electricity, there's no running water, there's none of what we might consider basic or essential services. But there is mobile phone towers. Here we go. I'm just going to run through these quickly. This is just after the rain. This is one of the friendliest villages that I've stayed in, actually. And the houses, they're not malaria-proof, unfortunately, but they're so comfortable when you're lying in them. I think Sean would be impressed, because I'd be feeling connected to country very much when I'm staying there. There's water supply. You just put a branch, basically, or a pipe into the side of the hill, and water comes out of it. It's a very wet country. Who likes bananas? Who likes boiled green bananas? Took me a while to get into it. And after a week of eating boiled green bananas for breakfast and for dinner, no lunch, you do get a little tired of boiled green bananas. But maybe you guys are better at it than I am. It's a little bit different to the houses that we're used to. It's beautiful, actually. But this village, that village there, that's about 1.5 kilometres from where the next mine is going to be. So, and it's, picture the most sharply incised valley that you've ever seen. It's only maybe 300 metres across, and there's a river running through the middle. And there's a number of houses down one side and a number of houses down the other, maybe 10 on each side. That's Pakumbe. It's one of the best places I've been to. It is so peaceful, and the water just runs through. This is a sort of a shameless plug. That's a report I wrote with my co-author. We're very keen on taking information back to the communities rather than extracting. And this is Howard, a colleague of mine, and he's looking at a map there, which is those colours that you can see, they're the leases that are over their land. So that's part of a trip going back and talking to the communities about how much mining there could be. But I hope you got a sense of vulnerability there from an environment completely unlike ours. It's a subsistence environment, and the people are very much in touch with their land. That's where they get their food from, that's where they get their water from, that's how they build their houses. So both the vulnerability and the desire for change. And so it's a desire to create change, not leave it in the hands of distant decision makers, whether they're the national government or transnational corporations. So like Neville, I've got a little bit of jargon that I want to introduce. Mine's extractive hedonism. So I want you to think about that. So the way I define it, it's a short-term obsession with the wealth from resource extraction, ignoring the impacts on people and place. Particularly prevalent when people from the developed world go and operate in the developing world. And if you've looked at eudaimonia at all, then extractive hedonism is on one side and eudaimonia is on the other side. So to me, extractive hedonism is very much talking about the way we do things now, and it leaves a lot unsaid, I suppose, about the way we do things in the future. Now, I'm going to try and unpack Eudaimonia in a little while, but I've got a shortcut and I'm going to ask you to do something. That's why I didn't ask you for questions before. So it's an exercise best done with your eyes closed. I'm closing my eyes because I want you to focus on you rather than you to focus on the stage. So what I'd like you to do is think about a number of important people in your life. You need a few of them. And then I want you to just sort of, imaginary portrait juggle these people in your mind. You're thinking about 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people. Then I want you to think about what they need to know themselves, to meet their needs, to meet the challenges that come to them and the opportunities that arise as well, and to live a life in dignity, human dignity. So you can open your eyes, and hopefully now you've pictured what eudaimonia really is. Because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about a good life or when we're talking about humans flourishing. It's very real humans being coming across very real issues that they need to solve to live a dignified life and to flourish. So it could be brothers and sisters, could be your parents in a nursing home, it could be your children at preschool, it could be people you've never met, like someone who lives down the street or refugees in a camp somewhere. There's all these people that are important, whether they're our immediate family, or whether they're our friends, or indeed just people we love because of part of the world's greater humanity. And for me, human dignity is paramount, and I'm going to use Adam Smith to back it up. So everyone's familiar who Adam Smith is. He's sort of the founding father of economics. The libertarians love to trot him out as sort of the archetype and the sort of a precursor to classical economics and neoliberal economics. He talks about human dignity as a tender plant. And having read a little bit about Adam Smith, he's probably picking up, or perhaps he's picking up from Isaiah 52, where they also talk about a tender plant. Humans aren't, when we're not born, we do need resilience. I agree, Mark. But we're also tender, and our dignity needs nourishing, and you can't just leave a plant on cold, dry ground. Nothing's going to happen. So despite having a talk and a PhD about eudaimonia, I'm actually quite new to eudaimonia. I found it about 18 months ago. It seems after many years of working on basically what is development justice, the impacts of mining on host communities, I came across eudaimonia. I was seeking better, more tools and a better understanding because I've been confronting the mining industry for a long time. And as my wife would tell you, I've had very few moments to celebrate in that working life. The mining industry is pretty hard to overcome. So I was looking for a new idea, an intellectual approach, a new worldview, basically, that would give me those tools. And it's because I'd seen that destruction again and again. Firstly, and I remember Joan from the Ladlow-Chewett Forest days, so the destruction on Wardandi lands when we saw the mining in the Ladlow-Chewett Forest, to destruction on the Ngadju lands in the goldfields of Western Australia, to Garawa country, like, way up in the Northern Territory, the Gulf of Northern Territory. And then obviously to where my focus is at the moment, in Papua New Guinea, where 97% of the land in Papua New Guinea is still communally owned. And I bring attention to these Indigenous cultures very deliberately. I suppose for me, their experience is one of a dominant extractive culture overwhelming them, making decisions on their country and developing in a way that they consider appropriate, often riding over the views of the values of local people. And I also mentioned the 97%. I mean, isn't that an amazing figure? I don't know how many of you knew 97% of Papua New Guinea is in communal hands. It's communal land, meaning it's not owned by any one individual. I could talk for another 20 minutes on tenure in Papua New Guinea. It is so interesting, and I will for a second. You have tree tenure, you have skin tenure, and then you have bone tenure. So the skin of the surface of the land, and then underneath is something different again. And you can have multiple interacting relationships across generations and across space, where different people are allowed access to that land. Our definition of ownership of private property is when we draw a line around something and pay money and say that's mine. It bears no, it has nothing in common with what other cultures might think of in terms of land and land ownership and land responsibility. But I also wanted to share a little bit about my journey with eudaimonia, although that's been even less than 18 months. In fact, I'm actually going to blame Rebecca, thanks, for asking me to do this talk, because it was only when I started to prepare for this talk that I thought, well, what's eudaimonia mean to me? I spend so much of my time at the moment thinking about eudaimonia, thinking about how to overcome development justice issues, how to tackle mining companies and try and secure a better result. I think I sort of forgot that actually it could apply to me as well. And so I'm going to share a little bit about me. Oh, actually, before I do that, I should say that it wasn't like I was, totally ignorant of eudaimonia. I just didn't know what the definition was. I think we've all been pursuing a good life for a really long time. And some of us have got better words for it, or bigger words, or words with greater history than others. But right from the start, I'd been pursuing that good life. But finding eudaimonia just meant that Aristotle had sort of wrapped up that worldview that I was seeking, and he did it a long time ago, and it just took me a fair while to find it. But let me stress, in case anyone's under any confusion, eudaimonia is not a religion, and I'm not proselytizing about it. It's just a concept and a way of thinking about how we might live a better life. And maybe you're all just slightly crazy for coming to a TED day called Eudaimonia, but obviously you're interested as well. But one thing thinking about my personal journey with eudaimonia was I realised how important my parents were. And I'll just I grew up on a wheat sheep farm, and somehow in that upbringing, my parents instilled in me both a recognition of the importance of and a belief in working for the commons, sort of the global commons, the local commons. And there's one example from my mum. She established and ran a kindergarten in our local farming town, and she ran it for 6 years before the government decided that it was a good thing and maybe they'd pay her. And so I had to think about these things, because there's my mother demonstrating through 6 years of volunteer work that actually the commons is really important. I mean, she did it for her children because she thought they needed a kindergarten, but she did it for everyone else's children as well. And if that's not common good, I don't know what is. My next really big impression looking back is actually the Falklands War. I was 11, and it was the first time I saw war on TV. And I realised for the first time that decisions made a long way away can sort of reach over into your life and change it without any, not even considering that you're alive, really. And so whether you were a Falkland Islander or whether you were a British sailor or an Argentinian pilot, all of a sudden decisions made a long way from you were completely dominating your life. The third one's education. I love education, formal, informal, on the job, at university. Just take it everywhere and anywhere you can get it, I would say. I think that education is a common good, and it's for the common good. It's not about getting an attractive pay packet, and that's my plug for free education. And lastly, my family, because you could call what I do, you could call it a hobby, I suppose. And it's thanks to Ingrid, my wife, who understands me, I think, and where I'm going, and offers a lot of support. And my 3 children, Hannah, Noah and Orla, who I think that humans do need to continue. And I find it hard envisaging a planet without humans. And so my children, I suppose, show me that there's something that I'm trying to work towards, something that we are reason enough to change, to overcome the inertia that's dominating Western society at the moment, and actually find a new way of doing things. But that's more than enough of me, I think. For hundreds of years, eudaimonia was translated as happiness. And that's where it was left. And so if you ever do any reading about eudaimonia, just be aware that depending on when it was written, it could mean something quite different. But happiness wasn't really enough. It left out, so Aristotle talks a lot about virtues. It left those out. Happiness is the superficial feeling that you get when you're having fun. Eudaimonia is something much deeper. So we're now translating that as human flourishing. And that picks up on those crucial aspects that Aristotle first described. So for me, eudaimonia is the good life, a complete life, free from banal abstractions, free from selfish prioritizations, free from material accumulation and obsession with consumerism. So there's some things that you need and there's some things perhaps you don't need when you're trying to live a good life. Importantly, it's the focus on community and the community good. So Aristotle talks about the polis, about the need for people to engage in political activity, in village activity, to be an active participant in the world around you. And that's crucial for human dignity, crucial for flourishing. And so I suppose that's what really tipped the balance for me in thinking about. So I've spent 15 years working on the impacts of mining, thinking about mining and thinking about mining companies. And a few years ago, I had my little realization moment where I went, I know mining's just a temporary thing. It's a temporary problem. It's a temporary land use. Actually, we shouldn't be concentrating on that. We should be, or whatever the problem is. I work on extractives. It could be something else. But we should be concentrating on the long term. We should be concentrating on the humans flourishing. We should be concentrating on looking after our environment. And once you take the focus away from the impact that you're trying to manage and put it on what you're actually trying to achieve, then you get to a place where you're looking at what's important rather than the problem you have to overcome right now. Rasmussen has 6 elements. So he wrote this in 1999. He's actually a full-on libertarian from the US. So it was interesting that I found anything to agree with him on. So for him, there's 6 parts of what he calls neo-Aristotelian eudaimonia. And he's just talking new, you know. But the good thing about that is that Aristotle's not all good. He didn't like women. He didn't like slaves. There's a whole lot of things we might not want to bring along with us when we're looking at what he said about eudaimonia. But there is some good things that we can bring. And Rebecca mentioned the Stoics. There's some good interaction with the conversations with the Stoics as well that helped us get a better understanding of what eudaimonia might be. So eudaimonia is an objective good. Second, it's inclusive of virtues and the material things that you need. It's an end rather than just a means. It's individual, so it's very much determined by yourself. It's but also independent of you. It's enough. Agent relative very much depends on where you live. You know, what's your culture say about what's important? You know, eudaimonia is not a prescription. Eudaimonia talks about flourishing, so what you need to flourish is going to be very different depending on who you are, what your life's been like, and the challenges and needs that you have. Finally, the 5th one, and this is what really drew me in, I suppose, is that eudaimonia is self-directed. So autonomy, self-determination, agency are key to eudaimonia. And I'm going to read this one because it's actually a quote from Rasmussen. Human flourishing must be obtained through a person's own efforts and cannot be the result of factors beyond one's control. Or to put it another way, you can flourish, but you can't be flourished. No one can do it for you. It's a journey you go on yourself. And soon I'll get to talking about development, and just remember that point. But the last one is social. Humans are other-orientated. We're non-atomistic. You know, we like people. We interact with people. We find meaning in our lives through our interactions with people. So the importance of community is key. I could also talk about eudaimonia in relation to the Human Development Index and the Human Capabilities Report, the work of Nussbaum and Amartya Sen, which some of you, I'm sure, would be familiar with. But I'll have to wait to the next TED, I think, to do all of that. It's too much today. So let's move to the extractive industries quickly. So 3 sort of parts of the extractive industries I want to look at. Obviously, we need extractive industries. You know, we use metals, minerals, energy for all sorts of things in our phones, our houses, you know, in medical, in science, in everything in our lives. We need extractive industries to give us what we need. I'm not arguing about them fulfilling a useful function. The second one is that mining extractives are important nationally. And I think if anyone's in Australia or from Australia or has been to Australia, they'd realise how much mining and the extractive industry dominates not just our economy, but also politics as well. And the benefits here are really financial. Extractives as a primer of the economy. And I could spend some time disagreeing and go into the resource curse and the Dutch disease, but I'll just take that as a given. Because what I'd like to move towards is the local one. So this is the impact on host communities. There's also lots of benefits here. So if you think back to the photos I showed you, like I said, this is an area where schooling is almost non-existent, health services are almost non-existent, the bridges that would make life so much easier and safer don't exist across the river. There are no roads. There's a complete absence of services, and the extractive industries, if developed locally, could provide some of those for the local people. They also provide wages and business opportunities. There's lots of good that can come with any development, including an extractive development. There's also a lot of adverse impacts, and we're shielded from those a little bit here in Australia. We get our own share of adverse impacts from mining. But in the last 3 weeks, for example, I can tell you about 3 different mining activists that have been killed, 2 in Honduras and 1 in South Africa. So for mining, for us, it's important in the economy. In other countries where you have an argument about extractive industries, it can cost you your life. In Papua New Guinea, murder and rape around mine sites is common, unfortunately. It's tragic. And other impacts right towards social cohesion. There's some great work done by James Leach, which looks at the interactions between culture, social structure, and the use of land. And basically how the mining industry or any development come in and can change that structure. There's 2 examples I want to give. So a lot of my work involves one particular mine up the top of the Waitara River in Papua New Guinea. It's not a very big mine and it doesn't really make a lot of money. But it is an ongoing concern. It's owned by Newcrest, an Australian company. The two villages that live under them, Hikingawi and Heiu, they're non-landowning traditional subsistence communities. So they don't get any of the rights. They're not asked about whether the mine should go ahead, nor do they get any of the monies from it. They've been assessed using a multi-dimensional, a 10-factor poverty index, and I cannot find poorer, more impoverished communities anywhere in the world than these 2. So once you get over 3, you're starting to talk about, on this scale to 10, you're starting to talk about pretty bad. These ones are 7 and 8, and we couldn't even measure one of the indicators because didn't have a reliable method. And so how can a mine site that produces so much for other people, how can that coexist with people that suffer extreme poverty, that have high and increasing mortality rates? It just beggars belief. And so for me, and the crux of the idea that I'm trying to talk about today, is that a lot of this is because development success is defined externally. It's defined by the national government who didn't know where faith lived. It's defined by the corporations who are looking to make a mine as big and as profitable and as quick as possible. So when we're looking at what development comes out of this mine, we're not asking the local people, not in a way that's meaningful, not in a way that gives them that autonomy, that agency, that self-determination. They're being flourished, not flourishing. And I'm sure that not only with extractive industries, because I'm not just interested in extractive industries, but that's for today and my PhD. But if you think about aid projects, failed aid projects, wasted aid money, I think there's more bad stories than good about the outcome success. And I suggest to you it's the same bit of colonialism. It's the same approach where we decide everybody should have toilets, or we decide everybody should have this or that. And we try and roll out this solution over everybody. And we literally do roll it out over everybody without asking them what they want. I think we can also think about eudaimonia in relation to it. I mentioned the human capabilities approach before, Nussbaum and Sen. We can think about eudaimonia as creating capabilities, creating the very the things that actually let us flourish. And that's what development is. Obviously, that's much harder to write in your development proposal or much harder to write in your report because you're talking about change that's occurring within human beings and them then being able to do something. You can't write that down as in we've delivered X number of water supplies or X number of toilets to this community. By the way, toilets and water supplies would probably be really welcome at these communities because they basically just share one toilet. So focusing on the human dignity rather than what we see, what Westerners regard as that development indicator that we need to meet. Unfortunately, I think that what I'm suggesting is sort of incompatible with the dominant culture the dominant extractive culture in the world at the moment, and that is us, basically. But I suppose I'm saying that because we also can have we can also take some responsibility for trying to change that. I'm not suggesting that this is the way things will be forever. I'm just suggesting that at the moment, when we look at it very much through a non-eudaimonic lens, when we try and think about people as obstacles to overcome in our pursuit of the wealth or the benefits that flow from extractives, we'll never get a just outcome. I hope I've given you some food for thought. Maybe an idea, a stepping stone on your journey to eudaimonia and about what eudaimonia might mean to other people. And I suggest to you that as we are on our journey to a good life, to thinking about eudaimonia, that applying a 2,500-year-old idea is not a bad way to overcome the myopia of the present. It's not working very well using the techniques, using our own thinking now. Let's try something. Let's think about human dignity in a different way, in a way that brings value, that recognises and brings value to people. And in relation to extractive industries, for as long as we continue to assess our efforts, to measure our outcomes against lesser goals, then we will always end up with extractive hedonism. Because at the moment we're focused on what we consider to be important for people rather than what other people, those people, consider to be important. So I think we need to seek to value things that cannot be bought and to allow the mines, the metals, minerals and energy industries to do what they should do, which is be there to help humans flourish. So, to finish with the words that I was introduced with, to find a way for the extractive industries to honour the interrelatedness, the interconnections between people and planet, to recognise that people in different places have different requirements, have a different human dignity, but nevertheless are on the same journey as us. And to put the extractive industries, to put our colonial development thinking back in the box where it belongs and let the extractive industries be a valuable but a temporary supplier of means, subservient and serving the common good. Thank you.